Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We are going to be talking today about strategies to combine geography and history using maps to compare and contrast. Well, today we are joined with our fabulous presenter, Tama Manelli. Did I say it right, Tama?
You're close. It's Nunnally, but it's fine.
Let's turn it over to Tama.
Thank you for having me today to share some strategies that we can use in our classrooms. So this is kind of our agenda. We've been through the introductions. We're going to look at some objectives that we're going to have for ourselves for how we take this back to our classroom. Have a little content discussion, and then during the closing, of course, we'll have time for some questions and answers. Today's objectives are to understand the use of maps as primary sources. You know, that's something that I know that in my school career, they've wanted to really combine the ELA with social studies, and particularly if you're doing an elementary level job, K-5, then you normally, if you're teaching the ELA portion, the reading portion, you're also teaching the history portion as well. So making sure that we use maps as one of the primary sources that we're asked to do in the classroom. Along with that, we want to increase critical thinking and problem solving skills. We know those are bywords. We know these by heart. They're going to come up at every faculty meeting. And the most dreaded, right? The how do you make this real world application? You know, I'm teaching ancient world history this year. How do I make this a real world application? So we're going to look at some of those ways today. All right, so geography in the classroom has a great background. There are several organizations, the National Council for Geographic Education, the National Council for Social Studies Education, have put out guidelines and pamphlets over the last 20 years, really stressing the importance of geography. Because believe it or not, one point in time, about 30 years ago, they actually started taking geography out of the classroom. The message that they really want to get across in those standards is the fact that there are ties to real jobs that these children are going to be getting in the future. So that's the real catch for a lot of my students. In the classroom, I've actually brought in people who are doing careers in geography, and the kids are like, oh, I thought it was just about a place on a map or the geography bee or whatever. And it isn't. These are skills that will help students to find certain talents that they have, help them to grow those and become much more analytical so that it really translates well to the workforce. Even the fact that we have power on today across Alabama, we can thank a geographer because that tie to GIS, that's how they keep our electricity going today. I have several friends who that's what they do for a living. They look at a computer screen, and the minute the power goes out, they can tell the crew immediately what's going on, where they need to go, and what they need to do. So it's all about jobs, and it's all data driven today. There are a lot of ways that we're already probably using maps in the classroom, but there are some ways that I really want us to look at today. So using them for inquiries, ways that we can develop questions for critical thinking and research based on geographical questions. Of course, using them for English language arts. I know that when I've read historical books with my students in the classroom, and I've got an example to share with you today, that we've traced those stories. So that's something I want to share with you, the way that you can trace them, but also some programs that are available where they're already traced for you. Especially examine topics, so looking at both the physical and human side of things. A lot of historians are not physical geographers because that's a lot more about the earth, right? About places on the earth, but we are definitely very connected to the human side of things. And so we definitely can bring out those elements. And looking within our own community, because I think it's very important, especially in the world that we live in today, that our students really understand the community that they live in. You know, instead of just, here's my video game and I'm playing it, or, you know, I'm so tied up in whatever sport I'm doing, you know, let's look at how can I tell the story of the history of the place where I live. And place is an important theme in geography. Looking at population pyramids, which are a little difficult to make, but happy to share that with you. And then historical events and historical scenarios. You know, ancient world history, right? Who cares? Well, there are reasons to care. And by using maps, we can help our students to understand that. One thing that I really use all the time in my class, my history class, to bring in geography is primary source analysis. Using aerial photography, one of my favorite uses of aerial photography is when I teach about Pearl Harbor in World War II. And I think we're going to take a look at that here in a few minutes. Statistics about spatial patterns. So this is where you get the kids really thinking critically about what they see. And so we're going to walk through some of those steps and looking not just at maps, but also photographs of map and comparing those and satellite images to look for things, in particular for population. So here we have two maps of the exact same location. And you pull out the first map and kids are like, oh no, we're really studying history today, aren't we? Because this is a really old map, and you can tell by looking at it. This is the town of Boston back in the early 1700s versus Boston today. And of course, the Boston today map is something you could get off Google, right? You could easily have them just take out their phones and pull up a map, and they can look at it in real time. But putting these two beside each other, you can have them do a lot of primary source analysis. You know, what's there? What isn't there? What has changed over time? You know, the big questions I always have my kids write down at the first of the year, and they know I'm going to ask them every day: who, what, when, where, why, and how. And every day I'm going to ask those questions, and they're going to have to answer those for me about whatever we're talking about. So something that you may notice immediately about this, or that your students may notice, of course, is the common area. There's still a common area. You see on the left-hand side, Boston Common, and then it's outlined in green on the right. And so one thing that my students always start out by saying is, oh, look, the one on the right has color. Well, okay, so why would the one on the right have color? Well, it's digitized. It's more modern. You know, we want to point out green spaces. We want to point out, rail lines and things like that. So that's something they immediately notice. Whenever I have them analyze maps like this that aren't maybe to scale, I do have them point out places that they recognize. So looking, for example, at the Charles River and really being able to find that on the original map and then pulling back out to see what else is there. So that's one way that you can compare maps. You can look at this historical map versus something that's a lot more modern. And I do have one that I didn't put a picture of in slides today that I really love to look at. It is a picture of the bombing of London during the Blitz. And for every spot where a missile has fallen on the map, when you click on that map, it tells you like how big the tonnage was, how big the explosion was, if anybody died, things like that. And what the kids love to notice is the location of like Kensington Palace, Buckingham Palace, to the locations that were bombed, because they recognize that from current events in the news, right? We talk about the princes all the time. So something that they're also familiar with, this Venn diagram idea of comparing and contrasting. And it's just a real quick way. You put a couple of maps down on their desk, or have them pull them up on the computer. You have them up on the big screen, and they draw out I make them draw out their own little circles. I don't waste paper on Venn diagrams. They've got to make their own. And then what is different? Right? What obviously is different? Well, there's not as much land available for Boston Commons, right? So why? Because people moved in, they built businesses, the population grew. They're lucky to have a park at all today. And then they can make projections about the future. Do they think that park's going to be there? And they have to tell me why. No right or wrong answers on that, but that is critical thinking. That's thinking using what they know about the past. Maybe we bring in a census of the population in Boston over the last 20 years. And we look to see how it's changed. Is it growing? Is there going to be a space for that park in the future or not? And then they have to write about it. I always include writing in everything that we do. The world population and density maps are also really good ways of having them compare and contrast maps. First map here, which is, density of population at a given point in time versus the density of population today. And there's so much they can say from this. Where were people at this time versus why they're here now. Why did they start out in this place? What might have made them move? Those push-pull factors, which are part of so many historical events. And if we want to make it more current, we can talk about what's happening right now in Afghanistan and what is pushing people out and where are they being pulled into. So definitely just looking at world populations is just a quick way to get them talking about something that's happening even today. Taking a little bit in-depth of look at this, we look at the 1790 map of the United States, and the first thing my kids say is, wait, where are all these people out here? And they ask if Alaska is really below California. And then I have to say, well, no, Alaska really isn't. Let me tell you where Alaska is. But they notice there are a lot of people here. I mean, they don't even have to read the legend to understand that there are a lot of people. Well, why are they there? Well, of course, the water, so we have that connection. Ports, people coming in, people settling here. And then I always have a student say, but where are the native people? And so then we can stop and we can take a look at where the native populations are during that time period. And then we can pick another time period and we do the same thing. And we go back and forth making those connections. Well, by this point in time, you're getting to where we have fought the revolution, where we've moved across the line, we're moving out west, we've been through the Louisiana Purchase. And again, then they bring back in the Native Americans and you begin to see how they get pushed onto the reservations. And then we look at a population density map just of the states themselves today. So why, for example, in 1790, we don't see anybody living in California, but then today it's one of the most populous states. What is that pull factor? What is that draw that they have to an outlier like California here on the map? It's pretty easy for them to get the fact that this is the first place where people settled, and so they understand that density along the East Coast. Water issues, if you wanted to bring in that real world connection we talked about earlier, I always would bring in some current events like about the water shortage that's happening out west right now. We were talking earlier about the fact that they've got this shortage along the Colorado River for the first time in history. And so then they would have to place this on the map. They would have to find the Colorado River. They would have to find some of the cities, Hoover Dam, things like that, and talk about that population density in this area and what can they do for water versus what are our issues with the water back on the East Coast, right? Our issues with water is sometimes we have too much of it, and where are we going to put all of it? So those are some of the comparing and contrasting things we do with that. With our physical and political maps, kids love these because, of course, when they're little, they think that Mississippi is really purple when it isn't. I know I thought that when I was a kid, and I was really disappointed to find out the states were not really those colors. They do recognize, though, the color that's on that physical map, and they can talk to me after we've studied historical events about understanding why it was so difficult to get to Oregon, especially in the wintertime, and why you would have to wait in Missouri, for example, before you could cross. Why would there be more people living along the East Coast than the West Coast? You can't just tell that from a political map, but looking at the physical map is something that they can easily kind of dissect. And then I would take the political map a step further, and I would add to the political map maybe some census data, where showing change over time. And then I also would add in things like delegates, right? So you can bring civics into this as well. This is an excellent map for civics. Why does this state, which is pretty small compared to this state, why might it not have as many delegates? And again, we go back and we look at the physical landscape. Didn't make it as easy to settle in some of these locations as it did for others. So an application for every part of social studies is what we're looking for. Maps and photographs. I love to have them compare a map with a photograph because and sometimes the photographs are current and sometimes they're not. But to me, it really pulls them in because they can actually see that the location is real, that the event that happened was real. So to me, it's another part of storytelling. And if we look at the map on the left, this is the invasion of France on D-Day. And so we would have had that conversation about what the flags mean. And then they can actually see the location where the invasion occurred. And they have to make some hypotheses about the difficulty, about why this location was chosen before I ever show them the photograph. And to me, that is comparing and contrasting, even though it maybe isn't with two different maps, although that can be done. I could bring in a couple of different maps of D-Day and have them kind of analyze it. Maybe look at it from the German perspective, right? What maps were they looking at for D-Day or for a potential planned invasion since they thought it was going to come from a different location. And so then we look at the actual photograph, and then they write about, were their assumptions correct, were they not, why, and those kinds of things. All right, so just a quick check for understanding. Just kind of take a second and think about how you can use some of this stuff in your classroom, and then we can discuss that more as we get into questions and answers, because I always like to analyzing population pyramids. So not quite a map, but really it is a map. This is a map of the population figures for males and female in 2 different locations in a period of time. So it's just a different kind of map. It's a graphic more than anything. So by looking at Kuwait versus Japan, and we look at the difference between the male and female population, we have the kids create a list of observations for each location and time period. Now they can actually create their own population maps. I have to say that's a great way to make your math teacher happy, because you can either have the math teacher do it with them, or you can do math in your history classroom. Actually, you can tell the kids how to do math in the history classroom. It's real easy. Then they'll grumble for a little while, and at the end, they'll be showing their pictures to everybody, and they'll be really excited. So what we did with this map is they did create some observations, and they could tell from this type of map that in Japan, they're facing a real problem of age. They're getting people who are going to be too old versus the next generation behind them who would be there to take care of them. In Kuwait, on the other hand, they have a very small elderly population now. It's about to be booming, but they've got a pretty good level of population coming in behind them to take care of them. So why is there not an older population in Kuwait? Well, let's look back to the 1990s, and there was an event that happened in the 1990s that affected that generation, right? So looking back 30 years to when the older generation would have been 40s and 50s, a lot of them fled the country during the invasion of Kuwait from Iraq. So we can make that connection back to a historical event. We can tie it to economics because of the economic situation that was going on in Kuwait versus what was happening in Iraq and neighboring countries. So there's a lot that you can get from this in terms of having kids think critically. I like to always bring it back home. No matter what I'm teaching, ancient world history or not, we are always going to be talking about Alabama, because this is where the kids live, or wherever they live, Mississippi, Georgia, wherever it is that they live, we're always going to come back and talk about this. So these population pyramids are from 2 counties in Alabama. And so we do the same type of thing. We know the physical features in Alabama. Why would somebody be more likely to move to Madison County versus Lowndes County? Well, if you're a farmer, you might want to go to Lowndes County, but if there's not much farmland left in Madison County anymore. And if you look at the census, Huntsville just overtook Birmingham this last week for having the most number of people in the state. So we can have children take a look at that. So I do have a few tools to share with you today to make it a little easier to get these classroom tools into your hands. There is a program, this is all free, from National Geographic called MapMaker Interact. I do caution a new version is on the way that I think you're really going to like. MapMaker Interactive allows the kids to make their own maps, and this is one thing that I've always done as much as I can with any historical unit, is I've had the kids map it out, because this is their way of telling a story. And this, of course, is the story of the Transcontinental Railroad. And I have to admit, we watch a little Snoopy video. It's a historical video with Snoopy in it. And Snoopy does sing, which I have to tell the kids isn't really real, like when we study about World War I and Snoopy really isn't fighting the Red Baron. But they get that by the time they're in 6th grade most of the time. And so Snoopy's building the Transcontinental Railroad. So we look at the physical features, and then they're able to have the distance. This is a feature that's part of MapMaker, is it shows them the distance between point A and B. And they're plotting these points, and they can go back and put pictures on these points as well. So just having to map it out and in a fun way where you're not just drawing on paper all the time can be really cool. And you don't even have to be good at MapMaker because it comes with a tutorial. So the teacher can still look cool by saying, hey kids, you're going going to do a tutorial that's self-learning, right, that we want them to do, especially if we don't always know how to do it. National Geographic does offer some black line one-pager maps. I have in my classroom, I've printed out the 50 states, and they have had to assemble it like a jigsaw puzzle, and then we'll wrap it up, and then we'll bring it back out in the hallway. Always, my principal loves it, and we draw on it through the year. We color in where people are living and why they're living there, and so by the end of the year, we have this beautiful giant map that we throw in the garbage. Esri also offers free software bundle to school systems. They can get it for free, and all you would do is contact your school IT administrator. But this is free from Jack Dangermond, and it started out as like a source that they use for government and for business, and now they're using it for education. So ArcGIS Online is kind of a step up from MapMaker Interactive. There's just a lot more things you can do with it, but what I really like is the fact that somebody else has already made a lot of maps for me. So not only do I not have to know how to do it, I also don't have to have my kids know how to do it, because the maps are out there and they can just go and search for them. Now, if you really love ancient world history like I do, my kids, these were special ed students that made this map. And one of the first things that you may notice is that there is a dead body on it. This is a map of Alexander the Great. So we read a book called You Wouldn't Want to Be in Alexander the Great's Army. It was on their reading level in 6th grade. And they're like, well, it would be this book has pictures in it, and it's so great, but wouldn't it be great if we could see like where they were? I'm like, well, we can see where they were. And so the kids made these stops on the map. This is a story map. You can have your students make, it could be on paper. You could have them draw something and write something out on it. They could make it using ArcGIS Online, MapMaker Interactive, Google Maps, whatever. And for everything that they're reading even in their textbook, they can plot a point on the map. What I did in this is I also added questions to it. The good thing is Esri already has story maps that are already made that you can go out and pull. They also have something known as geo inquiries. This allows students to ask questions. So if you teach world history, if you teach U.S. history, these are already made. They have the answers on them. So what I do is I print them out with the answers on them, and I have the kids work through it, and then they have to tell me why that is the correct answer. There are ways that you can take the answers off. Liquid paper I found works really, really well, but I'm good sometimes with the kids having the answer and then me asking additional questions or having them do something with it. So these are geographic questions that go along with just about every subject that you can imagine. Government, they've got one for economics and everything. If you want to teach them how to do this kind of thing or have an investigation, check out GIS Etc., something called Undercover Mapper, and it will show them how to do that as well. Reflection and closing. I hope that this has enhanced your knowledge today, and it will translate to something that you're able to use in your classroom. I am always available for questions and answers, including right now.
Thank you so much, Tama. That was awesome. And your passion about geography shines through. And I hope everyone has a great evening.